Hey, hey everybody, this is On, and I am here coming to you with the monthly video for Connecting Codes channel. That might be a little bit different terminology on some of the different platforms that you find, but I am the author of this incredible book right here, The Code Journey. And every year I put out a new edition on the book, so you definitely want to check it out. If you like the insights that I'm providing here, the book is a daily guidebook. It's kind of like a spiritual almanac, but at the same time, it gives you that heads up on things that are happening of when world events could get out of hand. And it also addresses things that are going on in the world or the currents that are present in our world. And that kind of gives us an idea of maybe when we should or should not be out at a protest, when to speak up, when to keep our mouth shut, and all of those great things. So anyways, I want to tackle a really big topic this month, which is going to be coming to light anywhere like right around the time this video releases, which has to do with this connection to the WHO, what they're calling the pandemic treaty. And some people are calling it that. Some people have different names. We have the truth and whistleblower community and all of that on one hand, talking about what a danger this is. And then we have the mainstream media saying, this is nothing like what's being said. And of course, you know, that always creates confusion for people. So that's usually a good area or a good topic for me to step in from a code perspective and say, well, let's look at what the currents are that are interacting. And that's what the codes are really about. It's about giving this insight of how the different energies are interacting and that are at play in what's going on and helping us to understand things. Sorry, I had a little bit of an itch there. And helping us to get a strong perspective on what this is really about, because it can get very confusing. And the more we have things going down in the world, the more we see the agendas playing out on both sides, and the more that the truth gets really confusing and it's really hard to see through things and what's going on there. And this is why you always want to get down to the actual sources of things. You want to go on to, for example, the WHO's website, and which is who.int. I think INT is short for international, maybe. And they actually have the written language of what this piece is that everybody's talking about. And what this really is about an amendment to their proposed amendments to the international health regulations. And the international health regulations are really about how things need to be handled. They're kind of like a list of guidelines or bylines or things like that of how things need to be handled in different health crises. And, you know, so many people are confused right now because they feel like, well, the World Health Organization, the CDC, aren't those people there to help us? Aren't they there to benefit us? Aren't they there looking out for our health? Well, you know, I've delved into this in the past and it's woven into some of my other videos, but also there's a lot of other people that have delved into it, and they show the connections that these organizations, whether they started that way or not, I can't speak 100% on that, but we do know that there's a lot of corrupt players in these organizations, and they actually are not. See, a lot of people think that these are government organizations, and they are not. And that's a big thing to keep in mind. Your CDC, they're really what they're called, like the WHO, the CDC, they're not branches of government. They are organizations that have been created by individuals for the most part, and people who want to create these different alliances. Well, you know, sometimes that can be a good thing, right? If people are coming together and really doing things from a pure heart, a pure spirit, you know, a strong space of divinity, that's one thing. But when people are coming together and doing things under the pretext of setting forth agendas and running what they want to see happen in the world, that's a whole different thing. And that's where we're seeing things play out, is because we're seeing now that these organizations have been so infiltrated by what I call corruption in a lot of ways. Some people call them deep state players. There's a lot of different names out there for what people are calling them. And so they are what's called quasi-government. And quasi-government is where you've got an organization or a business that is operating in coordination with the government. So now you've got kind of like a public-private sector partnership thing going on, and they're presented to be like branches of the governments in a way, but they're really not. They're really not branches of the government. They're their own entities that work with governments around the world. Now, the other thing that we want to keep in mind about this is these organizations work through membership. It's not just like, hey, you're in the world and we're all going to participate in this and all try to get along and share our experiences and, get different viewpoints and interact in intellectual ways. Has nothing to do with that whatsoever. These organizations, a lot of them have been created in order to implement the agendas around the world. And we have to keep that in mind, that these weren't created for the well-being of people. They were created to develop ways to control and oversee people. So could they have been used in a positive direction? Yes. Could they have been, at some point developed that, could have had good intentions behind it? It's possible. But the reality of it is that's not how they're being used today. So I want to make that very, very clear. And we can see that as these things interact. So there's a lot of different things in these amendments that are being proposed here. And a lot of the fear that's coming up for people right now is this aspect that means that the WHO can control everything around the world. And on one hand, that's true. On one hand, that's not. If, for example, we here in the United States, if we uphold our Constitution, and this is where a lot of people faulted, a couple of years ago when the US pulled out of WHO when we were under a different administration. I think a lot of people didn't realize why that was happening. It wasn't really explained to a lot of people. And I think I addressed that a little bit in one of my videos. And it has to do with these levels of corruption that are happening, the way that the United States is being taken advantage of. We have to keep in mind that the United States has been one of the biggest funder, if not the biggest funder along the way in a lot of these corrupt structures. And that is to uphold these corrupt partnerships that are going on throughout them. Now, when we start to delve into some of this, we start to see that the way it's structured, there actually is that possibility. Now, the mainstream media wants you to believe, like a lot of things, oh, that would never happen. Well, of course, they've been wrong over and over and over again, particularly the last few years. And, they're just reiterating and part of the game in a lot of ways. And so you have to be very, very careful. Just because it doesn't blatantly come out and say, okay, the WHO has total power in everything, that doesn't mean that they don't have total power in everything under these agreements. Now, if we really keep a sound mind, like I said, and if we here in the United States were to uphold our constitutional laws and to stand strong in that, technically they could not have any power or influence over us. And this is part of the reason that they can only have power and influence over really those countries who are in a membership or hold a membership within them. So this is another thing, because it's kind of like, if you have a community bylaws, right? Like if you're in a development community and they have community bylaws and you have to keep things a certain way in that community and things like that, and you pay your community fees for that. Well, that's a very similar structure to what we have in the WHO in a way. But that community governing board for that community, they cannot go out to other parts of the city and tell people how to live their life or have governance over them. And that's part of why we saw pulling out of the WHO a couple of years ago, because of the mishandling of things in there. Now, as we start to get into this, the big players, what they want to do with this is they want to develop, and it's written into these amendments, which, by the way, were proposed by Biden, by Biden's administration, I should say, I guess. The US is the one that's proposing them. It includes what is called a compliance committee. And that compliance committee is where we start to run into the danger. There's a couple of things, first of all, in there outside of even the compliance committee, which allows Tedros, which is the governing head person on the WHO, to come through and to be able to declare anything that he wants. He can say, oh, well, we are foreseeing that there may be a health issue. There doesn't even actually have to be one. And then he can decide through that, okay, we're going to shut everybody down. We're going to close everything down. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. So he really has this totalitarian governance structure within these amendments, which is why it is so dangerous. And this is why you hear people saying it gives Tedros total authority over everybody's health, over world health. Now, the things that we have to understand is with this, what he wants to do, and in these amendments that they're proposing, is they want to develop this compliance committee. And right there, that ought to be a really big flag right there for you. A compliance committee, which is, you know, very similar to an aspect of the truth ministry stuff that Biden was trying to put forward. And now they want to put through this WHO Ministry of Truth Health aspect that's going on. So it's kind of like, hey, we couldn't get this implemented in the US, so how about if we do it through the WHO? And this is really, when we get into this, these are biased people. So it's not like, you know, first of all, keep in mind that Tedros was placed in this position. He wasn't elected in, he wasn't voted in by people, he wasn't chosen by people. He was put in by people. And Tedros has this huge history, again, because this can all get very detailed and you can go days and days on researching all of this if you want to, but it's a lot to get into. And so he would have the ability to choose members of this committee. Then not only would he have the ability to choose members of this compliance committee, he would then also have the ability to choose people from the WHO organization to go and sit in on the compliance committee meetings in order to make sure the compliance committee was doing what he wanted. So you see, this is all this huge structured of control. So when we get into the looking at it, we got to remember also that Tedros does not have the best of backgrounds to him. He's not a bright, airy, you know, divine light player in things. That's the reality of it. When he came into the WHO organization, and let's take a look at a little bit in here. He came in and he has, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at some notes here. First of all, he's not a medical doctor. That's a pretty big thing if you're going to be running the World Health Organization. He has a doctorate degree, but it's in philosophy. It's not in health at all. So he doesn't even actually really have a health background. He was a health minister of Ethiopia or in that area for a while. So, but that doesn't give him a health background. Holding a title or a position does not mean you have any health knowledge to you whatsoever. So here you have somebody making decisions about people's health who has no health background to them whatsoever. Second of all, he tried to hide the coronavirus outbreak. Now, he has a long history of these political games when it comes to outbreaks and diseases around the world, and where he's held positions like in Ethiopia. And he hides the things he doesn't want people to see, such as things Gates was involved in that had to do with different viruses that were released in the African communities and were specifically targeted to destroy African communities. And then he tries to hide other things like the coronavirus outbreak, which I think is going to be one of his kind of downfalls. That's going to end up catching up with him. Then he hides what he doesn't want us to see, he expands and makes something big that doesn't really exist, or he tries to cover up things that are connected to Gates and other people associated. Then he is a member of the, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this word right, Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, which is designated as a global terrorism group. Okay, so he's not a nice guy. He's part of a designated global terrorism group, and he's working directly with Bill Gates in things. He's embedded, he indebted, excuse me, not embedded, but indebted Ethiopia to China. And he put Ethiopia in absolute debt to China. So this is another aspect, which means he has these strong connections with Xi. And when you start to put these pieces together, so you have somebody who's going to make decisions, and they're a corrupt person who is going to have sole authority over deciding whether the world is open or not open, over whether people should be mandatory vaxxed or not vaxxed, over whether people can have freedom or not have freedom in the world. It has total control over what people can say about health things or not say about health things. So there's no open discourse for people to interact and to have discussions in reasonable ways. Then you have him deciding who's going to be on these boards and who's going to be a part of these committees. The compliance committees are all about censorship. When you get down to looking at them, they're about censorship, they're about controlling people, they're about working with militia, they're set up to work with the UN, they're set up to work with three aspects of the UN, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization, the International Maritime Organization, and the World Trade Organization. Of course, Trump a couple of years ago pulled out of UN stuff because of a lot of these types of things that are going down and that are going corrupt. I don't know whether he foresaw all of this coming or not, but he certainly saw where some of the things weren't being handled right, and there were reasons for him to pull out. So when you get down to this, who's the big funders? Who's the big funders in who and the UN? Well, when we pulled out as the US a couple of years ago, it left the biggest funder as Bill Gates. Bill Gates was the biggest funder of who? That ought to tell you a lot right there. That's a big red flag for you right there in things. And that is where we start seeing these corrupt partnerships more and more and more. Now, when Tedros came into office, he had 4 goals. His goal was universal health coverage, health emergencies, health for women, children, and adolescents, and health effects of climate and environmental change. So when you look at those 4 things, universal health coverage, I know a lot of people that think that that sounds really good on the surface because they think, oh, look, everybody's going to be taken care of in the world. But that is not what universal health coverage is really about. Universal health coverage is about these other structures. And we have to keep in mind that not only is Tedros part of a terrorist group, but he is straight out Marxist energy, and he is straight out part of the Marxist Lenin mindset, which is part of why he gets along with Xi. And these mindsets are part of all of these global things that are coming together where they want global this, global that. This is all the one world stuff. Put it all in one place so that no country can decide for themselves. No state can decide for themselves. No province can decide for themselves what is best for them. And one size does not fit all. You cannot pull one size of clothing and make it fit everybody. It doesn't work. And that's what they want to do in some ways. But when you get into this aspect of central, it's, again, we're coming back to this centralizing everything. When you get back to this, you have one person controlling everything. You have a handful at best of people controlling everything. And if those people are corrupt, you have to understand they're not caring about your health. They're caring about their status. They're caring about their power. They're caring about the money that they're making. And they make a lot of money in these things. So when you look at that and work together, was the way things handled for the coronavirus pandemic, who profited from that? Big Pharma profited from that. They made major profits from that. Okay. Bill Gates is out there predicting another one. Isn't it amazing how Bill Gates always predicts something that is going to benefit him? It's always about benefit him. So he's kind of telling you, oh, I'm predicting this. In other words, I've already got this in motion, and he's already going to be set. He's already got the solution in hand to set up to come in and step in and handle everything. So we have to be very, very careful with this. So when we look at health emergencies, well, health emergencies, again, there doesn't even actually have to be one. Tedros can just come out under these amendments and say, okay, we have a health emergency. There doesn't even actually have to be anything going on. I perceive that we have this. Doesn't mean that we have it. And this is where we cross into the dangerous territory. And so he wants to oversee everything. He's trying to move into that position of having total overseeing of power. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want anybody overseeing me to start with, let alone somebody who has no real, true health knowledge to them whatsoever. I'm sure I probably have more health knowledge than Tedros does in a lot of ways, just from my own experiences in life, honestly. Then talking about the health for women, children, and adolescents. Now this, when you attach this and you look at this, that he's bringing this out under a Marxist construct. When you look at that, the Marxist structure, that is going to allow him to use health to remove children from families, to separate families, to break them up. Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to pull them away? Why focus on those? Why not men? Or where are the LGBTQ people raising the aspect saying, oh, why aren't you including us as well in our different gender identities? No, these are his specific ones. And why? Because with women, women are your procreators when they want you to be procreators. They are your servants, they are your slaves. And so they can do anything to them under that circumstance. It opens up to a whole realm of abuse. It opens up the right for them to take children away out of the families, rip them out of the households, rip parents away, and then take the children off to the programming areas, which is exactly what they do. And the adolescents, what are they going to do for them? They're going to train them into the military constructs. And that's where this comes in. And it's all done under the pretense of health. Has nothing to do with health. But they use health as the excuse. And then the fourth one, we already know that there's so many hoaxes and lies and BS around climate change and global, environmental change, which means basically he can say, oh, well, the air quality is not good today, so we're going to lock everybody down for the next week. Oh, well, our environment is struggling too much, so you can't have air conditioning in summer and you can't have heat in winter. That is the direction he's going. And this is where he implements, when you start to integrate these pieces, again, that Marxist philosophy, his goals, and these amendments, that's what he has the ability to do. And this is why it's stirring so much chaos in people around. This is not just conspiracies. This is the actual powers that he has the ability to do if he chooses to implement them. Now, when we look at the code patterns, and I want to get into these code patterns of things, and we look at the aspects of what happens when these three parts of the UN come together, the ICAO, the IMO, and the WTO. And when those three join together in code patterns, we have a breaking down of finances and health in the world. Isn't that interesting that those three particular organizations are being brought together to work with the compliance committee? And what do we see when we look at the codes of the compliance committee? The codes of the compliance committee are all about corruption. They're all about corrupt battles that are going on. And so the compliance committee has nothing to do with truth, nothing to do with upholding integrity. It's all about, this is what I want, and I am going to, if you don't agree with that, then we're going to, in whatever way we need to, shut you down, tear you apart from your family, haul you off, all in the name of health. So under these structures, they can literally come into your home, they can bust through things, and they can say, we believe you are a health risk. Now, another part of this has a huge amount to do with monitoring. Well, if they deem that there's a health risk, they can say, you all have to be chipped. You all have to have health passports. And that's how they do the tracking, and then using that information around and sharing that around. So this is where those pieces come in. Does it specifically say in writing, we are going to implement health passports? No, it doesn't say that specifically in writing, but what is in writing allows them to do this. And that's why it's scary, and that's why people are in upheaval about this. So this compliance committee is about battle, it's about war, it's about trying to take down opponents in a lot of ways. And this is what we see under these communist structures, these Marxist, these globalist structures that are going on, that is trying to be implemented throughout our world. So that's why that becomes very, very important. Tedros himself, when we look at his code patterns, Tedros, his code patterns, on one hand, it's good because his personal code patterns show that if he's not working in divinity, he's going to be defeated over and over again. Now, again, the caution that we have to have is to take a look and say, well, if Tedros has done all these things, why don't we know more about them? Because China's CCP stepped in and they covered a lot of stuff up. So they came in and they kind of made everything go away, which means not only is Tedros part of an organization that is designated as global terrorism group, but he's indebted to Xi, he's indebted to the CCP, he's ruled by them, he's governed by them. They made stuff go away, he's in debt to them. So in essence, they're really running everything, which means, you know, again, there's this big battle going on in the world for this one world total power. And everybody wants to be the one controlling that, all these leaders that are kind of doing some of the things they're doing, some of these big players in there. So you can see this is not about health at all. And when you combine this compliance committee with the other three organizations out of the UN on a code perspective, what we find is the breaking down of abundance. So this is all about breaking people down, breaking their sense of spirit, breaking down their ability to feel abundant. It's all about deprivation is what it's really about when we start to interact these pieces. And when you look at how they're going to be interacting with the United Nations, and I thought I had I've got the codes there on that. The United Nations is really, you know, it's kind of like this military rebellion thing. So every time the good military steps up and does something and makes progression, the United Nations is actually, a lot of it's behind the backlash. It's the corruption area. So, you know, they could go, again, a lot of these organizations could go either way depending on who's running them. But when you look at the United Nations, they're really not the good guys. They're the guys that are going to come up and be the battlers, the fighters, the warriors for people that are, you know, fighting back against the people who are trying to protect people. So they're actually not the ones that are protecting, they're actually the ones that are fighting back. So Tedros has this thing that every time he operates irresponsibly in his code patterns, he's going to have an issue. Now, when we combine Tedros and the code patterns with the World Health Organization, and the World Health Organization is very interesting because even though it should be about peace, it actually is about breaking down peace in the world, which is a very interesting piece. It's about disturbing peace, not creating peace. And that's very interesting from a code perspective. And when Tedros code energy interacts with the World Health Organization code energy, what we find is that he becomes the provocateur. He becomes the person who is there to provoke people into action. He is there to provoke people into rebellion, to get people to look bad so that they have the right to attack them. This is a pattern I've talked a lot about in the codes. So in this interaction, in his position in the World Health Organization, he now becomes the great provoker. He's a perpetuator of lies, of distortions, of corruption, and he does it under a language that makes people think that something is good when it really isn't good. He uses the flowery language, and then he does what a lot of groups do today, a lot of government organizations do today, and that is they go into these groups like the LGBTQ groups, the Black Lives groups, the different cultures, the Hispanic culture, whatever culture, and they use them to create division in the world. They use them to create battles. They use them to create it. And they say, look, if you guys do this, we're going to have this beautiful life and everybody's going to have health care and everybody will be taken care of. And that's a bunch of BS. And they're just saying that to get these people to take action. And they'll say, but you know what? These other people over here, they don't want that. So you need to go out and hate them. You need to go out and attack them. And this is where we've gotten the problem. And they particularly draw on the flamboyant ones, because I know a lot of people actually that are in same-sex marriages, same-sex relationships and things like that. And they are not these extremist people. They are in a relationship. And, you know, they're not a lot of the people that are brought into the media. So these groups and organizations, they then draw on these extremists, these people that are very flamboyant, very dramatic, things like that. And that's where they pull them out, and then they use them to create these divisions and these separations and these battles among people. And they do that to try to provoke the people who are standing up for what's right, who are trying to uphold the integrity and things, who are trying to protect people and the rights of people. And then if they can get them provoked, then they have a reason to attack them. So we have to be very, very careful about this, especially while Tedros is in this position. I have to believe at some point he's going to be pulled out of this position. But in the meantime, we have to be very careful. Pay attention to these agendas. See the interactions of these things. And when we start looking at things like universal health, it could swing either way. But at this point, it's not favorable because we don't have good people in there running things. We don't have the people who actually care about humanity running things. When you combine the aspects of the World Health Organization, the UN, and the World Economic Forum, which are all teaming up together right now, and that's never a good thing. When you have finance and military and health organization teaming up, it's not a good thing in this situation. And when the three of those actually come together in a code perspective, what we have is lies, deception, and manipulation. So they're joining together to strengthen their ability to lie and deceive and manipulate people. And that's where that's all going. So I have to say to you, just pay attention. Don't forget your power. Be willing to find the legal channels to stand up to these things if you're in a position to do that and can do that. But most of all, be aware of what's going on so that you're not buying into the lies of these organizations, and that you can see where it's going, and that you can take whatever precautions you need to take in things, and to recognize what your true rights are, that even with these things, these people do not have power over your life. But what is happening that we have to be aware of is the people who are turning us over. And basically in this process, by the US submitting these amendments, if you go to the bigger picture, it's basically turning the US over to China again in another form. It's turning it over to global governance. And as I've said over and over again in the codes, the more centralized governments is, the worse it is for divine presence in our world, the worse it is for God to exist in the world. You turn over all of your rights, and this is not going to go down a pretty path if we do that. So we have to stand up for these rights. So I'm going to cut it right there. I know I've been talking for a while. I hope this gives you some insights. Feel free to jump right on over to my website, check out this work here. CompassionCodes.com is the website. and give me some comments, like, subscribe. I hope this information's been helpful, and I hope it's given you some deeper layers on some things and shown you part of what is behind this alleged, pandemic. What do they call it? Pandemic treaty, which is really this shifting of these regulations that are going on. And check it out for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. Go in there, do your own research, and take a look at how these pieces can really connect in. Take care, everybody, and I will see you soon.